Okay, folks, we're going to start the last half of our session here this afternoon, and we're going to start with Rory Macneil. Thank you.
Thanks, Nancy. I'll just wait until everybody sits down and it's quiet, if that's okay. So, hi everyone. This is quite exciting for me. I stood here literally 4 years ago to this day and made a similar suggestion as I'm going to make, and I don't think I really understood what I was talking about, and I'm absolutely confident nobody else in the room did. And I think 4 years on, we might be able to talk together, so this is really exciting. So let me explain. I'm Rory Macneil from ResearchBase, which produces a product which is a digital research platform called RSpace, which I'll talk about briefly later on, and I'm based in Scotland. So I'm kind of have two differentiators, I think, from most of the people here. First of all, I'm coming from a European perspective, which I hope will be interesting. And secondly, building on some of the earlier Larry's comments and others, I'm a data guy, not a compute guy. And I'm kind of here, I think, as an ambassador to some extent for both Europe and for data. So let's see if we can engage here. So the title of my talk is about Research Commons, which is a concept which has been mentioned earlier, the Norwegian Research Commons in particular, as a possible model for NERC. So that's kind of the way I'll get started. So I'm going to talk about, this is just a summary. First of all, what are Research Commons? It's already been touched on today. Then there's a new important global open Research Commons international model on which the proposed Norwegian Research Commons is based. And then I'm going to raise the question, could NERC be a Research Commons? And then I'm going to move on to talk about Dataverse, which you've already heard about extensively, and RSpace as the potential core of a NERC Research Commons. And then just briefly at the end mention federation possibilities, which is also very important. So again, I think this is how data people think about the world. It's the research. Just ignore the thing on the left. It's the research data lifecycle, and that's how non-compute people, if you will, the long tail of I think many disciplines of researchers as well as research data managers think about things in terms of this data lifecycle. So what's the problem? And this is actually thanks to Emre and Scott. This is really stealing what they said. So the lack of data-centric tools and the lack of interoperability between tools leads to siloed data, which impedes the FAIR principles, which we've heard about, and also creates friction for researchers. So again, with apologies to Scott, who unfortunately, as you heard, is not well and couldn't be here today, but and they used to call this at Harvard a Research Commons. Maybe the name is changing, but the concept is still the same. So what did Scott say? He said we need to bring together data with cloud computing infrastructure and commonly used software, services, and applications, and that's what I'm going to be talking about, for managing, analyzing, and sharing data to create an interoperable resource for a research community. I think that actually expresses it really nicely. So who's going to provide Research Commons? Well, universities, we've already heard about Harvard, but also, and this is what I'm going to be talking about today, national organizations like Canada's National Digital Research Alliance, and indeed in Europe's European-wide supranational organizations like in the European Open Science Cloud, the EUDAT Collaborative Data Infrastructure. So there was a really important development which is actually stimulating a huge amount of energy and activity. Whoops, it looks as if that got a bit crushed. But anyway, the Global Open Research Commons International Model is a model which was developed by the Research Data Alliance. I realize many of you here probably aren't familiar with the Research Data Alliance, but for those in the data world, it's the most important kind of source of innovation and ideas for people involved in research data management. So it's an important body. And there was a working group there that released something called the Global Open Research Commons International Model last November. And as you can see from the slide here, there's 9 elements to this model. And the most important one is actually services and tools, which is kind of the technical core of it. But it also involves other things, and it involves compute. So the things in blue are kind of the technical underpinning, if you will. But it also involves the things in white, human capacity, which we've heard a little bit about, as well as things like governance, engagement, and sustainability. So this is just a graphic, but it's supported by a few hundred pages of detail. And it's intended to be a model or a guideline for Research Commons. So I'm going to talk a bit about the proposed Norwegian Research Commons, which I was involved in developing. But there was a meeting last week of this working group, and it was really amazing. I mean, I would say virtually every country in Europe is thinking about developing a Research Commons, actively thinking about it, and using this model as a reference. So I think it's very significant. And not just countries, but Elixir, which is the Europe-wide life sciences research infrastructure, which has had billions of euros of investment, is also looking at it, and again, using this model. So it's very much the topic of the day, I would say. So let me talk now a little bit about the proposed Norwegian Research Commons. So this is an interesting one. Actually, it was invented right here in Boston, in a way, because it started out as a proposal to the Norwegian government, which provides funding for research infrastructure, and Dataverse Norway, was going to put in a proposal to basically upgrade Dataverse. And because we work closely with Dataverse, I was involved a little bit, and I said, hey, this isn't really very exciting. Are you really think the Norwegian government's going to give you 12 million euros to upgrade Dataverse? Maybe not. Why don't we propose a Research Commons for Norway? And by the way, this new model exists. So that was really the origin of what became the proposed Norwegian Research Commons, which has been called Reason. And this was built, the technical core is built around a few components which will be familiar to people here, or to some people here anyway, because it's basically Dataverse, iRODS, and RSpace, which already have a lot of integrations which allow good flows of data. And the proposal is to, in effect, work on further integrations, further upgrades to the integrations between these existing tools and services, and then also integrate them, again, relevant to our talk today, integrate them with the existing Norwegian underlying storage and compute infrastructure. And I don't know if you can see, I think you can see it fairly well. So you can see from this, from the graphic, you got the underlying infrastructure at the bottom, and then you come back to the research data lifecycle, the way that research data managers think of these things. So you have a planning phase, collect and process, share and reuse, and then publish. And you can see some of the tools which are proposed to be involved in this. So I think the last part of this got cut off at the bottom, but the objective is to create an integrated infrastructure that facilitates streamlined flows of data and metadata. Well, to me, that's very reminiscent of Scott's definition of what a Research Commons should do. So this wasn't directly inspired by Scott's articulation, but I think it's actually very close to it. So could Reason be a model for other Research Commons? Well, I think there's actually, it has a lot going for it in that respect. First of all, it's the first attempt to walk the walk as well as talk the talk of the GORC international model. So it's several hundred pages of detail around that graphic. It's got a number of, I think, very strong elements. It comprehensively uses all of the GORC elements, so all of the 9 elements are described in this proposal. It's not just the technical core. But it has, as you can see from the graphic, it has a detailed instantiation of the services and tools elements of the GORC model. So we're not just talking fluff here, we're talking about actually very specific set of tools and services and how they can be built and how they can interoperate. It's built around a group of complementary generalist tools, and I'm thinking in particular of RSpace and Dataverse and iRODS, that are all designed to enhance verification of data. The focus is on interoperability of tools, data, and metadata. And it recognizes the challenges and the need to interoperate with existing generalist and domain-specific research infrastructure, including storage and compute. So I think all of these elements make Reason a good reference, let's say. I wouldn't say it's a model, but I think it's a good reference for others who are thinking about building research commons. And in fact, when we had this meeting last week, and there were people there from Sweden and the Netherlands and Germany who were also thinking about putting together research commons. And I think they found the detail that we were able to provide when we described Reason extremely useful. So that's the beginning. And since then, we've had conversations with, again, a UK initiative. It's called BioFair, which is the Elixir, the life sciences, the UK node of this European life sciences research infrastructure. And yes, they're thinking about producing a research commons called BioFair. And yes, now they're interested in using Reason as a reference as well. So, okay, how about NERC? Could NERC become a research commons? Well, here's the graphic you've seen before. This was this is on my presentation 4 years ago. And again, it was, to be fair, it was, if anyone remembers, it was literally the beginning of COVID, so things kind of died down after that. But I really don't think, I mean, NERC wasn't ready for this 4 years ago. RSpace certainly wasn't ready for it. I don't think Dataverse was either, so it was premature. But my question today is, well, you know, maybe the time has come to think about it again. So let me talk more specifically about Dataverse and RSpace as initial core elements of a NERC research commons. You've already heard Stefano describe Dataverse in general terms, as well as talking in particular about the compute work that's been done in Dataverse. So again, just to kind of repeat, Dataverse is a generalist data repository. Its two great strengths are the fact that it's supported by Harvard, has always been actively supported by Harvard, and there's a vibrant global community that works with and develops Dataverse. It's one of the recognized generalist research repositories, and GRAY is an initiative of the NIH to try to help the generalist research repositories to co-opetition, as it's called, to improve each other, but also to compete. And finally, as you saw from Stefano's presentation, Dataverse is also cognizant of the importance of having good support integration with compute. So that's Dataverse. So RSpace, which is my story, RSpace started out life, and again, I realize this may not be familiar to all the people in the room, but as what was called an electronic lab notebook. So somewhere where life scientists and other researchers who used to use paper lab notebooks could transition to digital note-taking. Over the years, it's evolved. It now includes a very modern and sophisticated physical sample management system. So you can manage your physical samples as well as your experimental data together. And it's got, in a way, the ecosystem has overtaken the tool. So really RSpace, it's not really RSpace, it's the RSpace ecosystem now. So we have done integrations with, I think, more than 20 different tools now to support this flow from preparation to active research to storage and reuse of data. And the blue ones are kind of the research integrations, if you will, research integrations with the ability to integrate with storage, the ability to integrate with specific tools which are used in particular workflows like animal colony management systems, equipment scheduling systems, protocols I/O, et cetera. And then, as well as Omiro, which is a open microscopy environment, which is widely used by many scientists everywhere. And then the ones in purple are kind of a research data management flow. So we integrate with data management plans and also data repositories. So data can be exported from RSpace to Dataverse and other repositories, and then it can be made available for reuse in the way that Stefano was describing. We also integrate with data management plans, which can be incorporated into RSpace, associated with the data that's actually produced in the active phase of research, which is where RSpace comes in, and then exported to Dataverse and other repositories at the end of the cycle. So it's a research and a research data management platform. It's kind of where research meets research data management. And of all the integrations we've done, the one with Dataverse is the most, I would say, the most intensive. And it's also the one that we are probably see the most promise in, and we are continuing to work on. I'm going to the Dataverse community meeting from here next week in Mexico City, looking forward to that. But again, don't know how well you can read that, but we've got the, I mentioned the DMP integration, mentioned a few other things. So you can export data from RSpace to Dataverse, and you can also associate persistent identifiers in RSpace, which are then passed on along with the data into Dataverse. So you can export metadata about the data from RSpace into the Dataverse metadata categories. And if you associate a controlled vocabulary from a particular domain, that could be associated with the data set in RSpace. And that could also then be, when the data is passed on to Dataverse, that controlled vocabulary information also gets passed to Dataverse. And we're looking at additional enhancements to the integration as well. So here we go now. If NERC wants to think about developing a research commons, I think Dataverse and RSpace could be the core of it, and that could happen pretty easily. So it doesn't need the full panoply of services in reason just to get started. And here's what it might look like. So I've just put the you can see here the kind of all the things, but let's just concentrate on RSpace and Dataverse. And instead of the Norwegian research infrastructure beneath it, you have the NERC infrastructure and what lies beneath NERC. And I have some exciting news, thanks to Oran. And we didn't quite make it. We're not quite there, but I think we're about 2 days away from having RSpace being deployed on the NERC. So that's a nice development, and I think that will stimulate some further activity. So finally, there's been some talk of federation, and it's clearly an important issue. And given all the activity that's going on in Europe, in Australia, in Canada, around research commons, I just raised the thought that having a research commons element to NERC might be a good trigger or a good handle for starting conversations about federations with some of these other initiatives which are developing. And lastly, thanks you very much. So this is here in case anyone's interested in learning more about research commons or the GORC international model or reason. I've put some links. Thank you.
I guess I'll ask a question. So I'm just trying to get my head around it. I don't really fully understand the relationship between Dataverse and iRODS. I don't quite understand, because they seem to have some overlap, and I'm not sure. Can you sort of give a thumbnail description of the difference? What each one does that the other one doesn't?
Well, I think they're quite different. Dataverse is a repository, and iRODS is a policy management system, or a virtual file system. iRODS is like Starfish, if you're familiar with Starfish. I don't know if you're familiar with Starfish, but so in the RSpace context, we currently use iRODS. So if you link you can make a link between an external file store and RSpace, but if the location of the file moves, the link breaks. So we put our iRODS in the middle, and it tracks the file. So you solve the broken links problem. The second thing we're working on at the moment is exporting data from RSpace to iRODS, so it's going the other way. And then you have, if iRODS is able to see a huge pool of data, then you can, and again, because you have metadata associated with the data, when the data goes into iRODS, for example, if this is one of the aspects of the Reason proposal, data could also be exported from Dataverse to iRODS, and then you have a larger pool of data which would be discoverable, and you could make associations.
Okay. So I just get confused because there's so many layers in some sense. We have the, from the Dataverse to iRODS to the S3 layer underneath these things. It feels like we're introducing a lot of layers, but I think I understand. So just going to another thing is that there's clouds. If you look at Amazon, there's Amazon's cloud and offers, it says services, period. When people talk about federation, they often talk about distinct academic clouds that provide some degree of federation, some set of rules between them. If I have to look at the ultimate, if we were successful with where we're trying to go with NERC and MOC, is not really about federation. Federation kind of implies possibly multiple clouds that then have some rules of association between them. We kind of like to create a collaborative cloud, a cloud where there are, where we actually can hit the scale by having entities like, the group controlling NERC. We add more people to them as more institutions become involved, but it's one service scaling to more data centers as this goes. So creating a Uber cloud, which is a collaboration between research rather than a whole bunch of distinct clouds that federate. And I'm trying to get my head about if that model is successful, what does that mean for this? Like if we're successful in creating a research cloud where institutions around the world are collaborating in that research cloud rather than a cloud that's federated with other research clouds, does that mean that the data commons is the world's research data commons? Or would there be many instances of it, say, for different curated data by different entities?
Well, certainly in Europe, you could run, it's not going to work at all because of the data sovereignty is one of the primary driving issues in Europe. So they would never have their data be on a cloud which is outside of Europe.
Well, so, no, I mean, we were talking with our Irish colleague over there about having another data center in Ireland that was, we would be having services where we're working together. And clearly there's regulations around data with compliance and of course, things like that. But if we could span this thing, if it could grow to be a collaboration between many research organizations to create a larger research cloud, with, of course, there would be rules about where data had to live inside that thing. Should I just think about this as a data commons for the research community, or?
Well, that would be ideal. As I say, I think there could be a lot of regulatory as well as technical issues to achieving that. But in the US, it would be a lot simpler to start with the US in that case because you don't have the data sovereignty issues.
Apologize for missing part of that, but effectively, doesn't some of the technology you're describing, iRODS in particular, probably help solve this problem for a federated data community that has where some data has to be resident in a certain location, but individuals can be authenticated to access it, or groups in a secure manner, wherever
Yeah,
it is?
yeah. I think that's the approach. Absolutely. Yeah.
So what's the next step? I mean, it's a really cool idea. I think that if you look at some of our colleagues that were discussing AI, if we were hosting a massive amount of data from the research community, I think that would be an incredibly powerful thing for it. Where do we go from here?
Well, I don't think I should be advising you on that. But I think I was just chatting with someone from Dataverse this morning. On the RSpace Dataverse, I think what would be nice if we have RSpace and Dataverse, which are already integrated, up on the NERC, which will be happening soon. That can then be a showcase or a window for people to discover that and to begin to use it and to explore possibilities. So that's a start. As to the broader kind of where you want to take NERC and the MOC, I don't really think I'm well placed to advise on that.
If one wants to create critical mass of a data commons, one can we've got those elements in place, and maybe it'll just grow organically to that. There's also representatives of the Commonwealth here. Is there something we should be applying for or doing to sort of get this thing to grow?
Well, absolutely. I mean, we can talk about that maybe. If you look at reason is it's to get funding. It's to make all these workflows more seamless, to make them add value, to make it easier for researchers to do more things with all the things that we're discussing, and that takes resources. And so reason is one way to do that. And we don't even know if we'll get the grant until the end of the year. But absolutely, why don't we talk about applying for some funding to do some of the specific things that we would like to do, and also that was in a different context as well, so there could be some different things. So absolutely.